Before the 1960s, if you wanted to hear the sound of the future, well, you were pretty much out of luck. It was locked away in university labs and giant corporate research centers. It was a sound that was calculated, not performed. But all of that was about to change, thanks to one really curious inventor from Queens, New York. Okay, so let's really get into this. Before Moog came along, this was the question. To make electronic music, you were less of a musician and more of a lab technician. You were working with these massive, room-sized machines, and you had to program them with things like punched paper tape. It was this slow, academic process, totally disconnected from the vibe and the spontaneous energy of actually making music. And this slide, wow, it just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, you've got the RCA Mark II, this absolute behemoth that filled an entire room and cost a fortune. And on the other side, the Moog modular synth. It was compact, you could play it in real time with a keyboard, and it was built from the ground up, not for scientists, but for artists. This wasn't just a small step forward, it was a complete game changer. So who's the guy behind all this? At the heart of this whole revolution was one man, Robert Bob Moog. And he wasn't a rock star, he wasn't a record producer, he was a tinkerer, an engineer with a PhD in physics, who was just deeply, deeply curious about what sound was actually made of. And you can kind of trace his whole journey right here. It all starts in his dad's basement, building these cool electronic instruments called theremins when he was just 14. By 19, he already had his own company selling kits to other electronic hobbyists. And then, while he's getting this intense PhD at Cornell, he meets a musician named Herb Deutsch, and that one meeting would literally change the course of music history. And this is really the key to the whole thing. Bob Moog, he could build the circuits no problem. But Herb Deutsch gave those circuits a reason to exist. See, Deutsch was a composer, and he helped Moog figure out what a musician would actually want to do with these electronic sounds. Their very first prototype, this collection of circuits they hilariously nicknamed the Abominatron, was the first real step towards an instrument built for expression, not just for sterile experiments. So, what did this partnership actually create? Well, it basically unlocked a whole new language for music, and it was all built on three core, absolutely revolutionary ideas. Okay, first up, and this is the big one, is the idea of voltage control. Think of this as the central nervous system of the whole machine. The big idea was that all the different parts, the oscillators making the sound, the filter shaping it, could talk to each other using electricity. And Moog did something brilliant. He standardized it. A change of exactly 1 volt meant the pitch would go up by a perfect octave. This simple, elegant standard is the reason the synthesizer could finally be played like a real tonal instrument. Now, if voltage control was the brain, the ladder filter, that was the soul. This patented circuit is the secret sauce. It's what gives the Moog that famously warm, rich, fat sound. It let you start with a really complex, buzzy sound wave, and then, like a sculptor with a block of marble, just musically carve away all the parts you didn't want, leaving behind this beautiful, warm tone. And last but not least, we've got the ADSR envelope. And this idea actually started with a prototype that literally used a doorbell button. It gave musicians control over the entire life cycle of a note. You have the attack, which is how fast the note comes in, the decay, how it settles down, sustain, how long it holds, and release, how it fades away. Suddenly, for the very first time, an electronic sound could have the same kind of feeling and expression as a real acoustic instrument. So Moog builds this incredible instrument, but an instrument is useless if no one plays it, right? The world needed to hear what this thing could really do. And the moment that changed everything came from the most unlikely place you can imagine, a bunch of classical music from the 18th century. That album was Switched on Bach by Wendy Carlos, and wow, its success wasn't just big, it was seismic. We're talking over 1 million copies sold, 3 Grammy Awards. This wasn't some weird niche record, this was a straight-up mainstream phenomenon. And this quote right here, it just nails why this album was so important. Wendy Carlos proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the Moog synthesizer was a serious musical instrument. It could be beautiful, it could be complex, it could be emotional. It wasn't just for making pew-pew spacey noises in cheesy sci-fi movies anymore. After Switched on Bach, the floodgates just blew wide open. All of a sudden, the biggest artists in the world had to have that sound. You hear it with the Doors, the Beatles used it all over Abbey Road, and then prog rock pioneers like Keith Emerson came along and turned the Moog into this monster lead instrument, right up there with the electric guitar. So the big modular Moog was a massive success, a total triumph. But there was a catch. It was an amazing instrument for rock stars and big shot studios, but not so much for the average working musician. The next step was to bring the revolution to the people. And that catch was all about practicality. I mean, the original modular systems were a spaghetti nightmare of patch cables, they were super temperamental, and back in 1967, they cost as much as a house. They were just way too big and way too expensive for a band to just throw in the back of a van and take on tour. And so, in 1970, the solution arrived, the Minimoog Model D. This thing was genius. The most important connections were already wired up inside, so you could get a great sound without touching a single patch cable. It was all packed into this beautiful wooden case you could actually carry, and this is huge, it introduced the pitch wheel, which finally let a keyboard player bend notes with the same soulful expression as a lead guitarist. But here's my favorite part of the story. One of the Minimoog's most iconic features was actually a mistake, a total happy accident. Turns out its power supply was a little bit flawed. It never quite kept the three sound-making oscillators perfectly in tune with each other. And that tiny engineering mistake created this rich, warm, massive chorus effect, the iconic sound that everyone fell in love with. Okay, so we've covered the invention. We've seen how it blew up in the 70s. But the story doesn't stop there. Not even close. The DNA of Bob Moog's inventions is still deeply woven into the music we listen to every single day. I mean, let's just break down a sound you've definitely heard. That high-pitched, whiny, melodic lead sound you hear all over Dr. Dre's G-Funk records in the 90s, that is pure Minimoog. It's just a simple sawtooth wave with a long glide time so the notes kind of float into each other, and then you crank up the resonance on that ladder filter to get that signature squeal. It's a sound born directly from Bob Moog's workshop. And that legacy, it's absolutely everywhere today. You've got the Bob Moog Foundation and the Moogseum in Asheville, North Carolina, keeping his history alive. That incredible fat bass sound from Parliament's Flashlight, it became a building block for funk, for disco, even for Detroit techno. And the company that Bob Moog started is still right there in Asheville, building modern instruments that carry his vision into the future. And that kind of brings us full circle to this really interesting question, doesn't it? Today, we have software that can create any sound you can possibly imagine, perfectly, cleanly, with no mistakes. And yet, musicians and listeners, we're still drawn to the warmth, the instability, the beautiful imperfections of these old analog circuits. It really makes you wonder, what is it about that imperfect organic sound that still speaks to us so deeply?